So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House? We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie. So I suffer really badly from FOMO when it comes to sort of stories that I'm not on.
Okay. Yeah.
I was texting you, asking you about Budapest and this story that you travelled over to attend the... Is it the opening of the trial or is it pre-trial still?
It was last Friday. It was still pre-trial, and we still have one more pre-trial before the proper trial begins.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just dying to know. But anyway, you can only tell us a certain amount because obviously you can't identify the individual. Just go back over the story. We've spoken about it before in the podcast, but just to save anybody having to rewind.
So to bring us back to the beginning, the crime occurred in November 2024. A young American nurse by the name of Mackenzie Michalski was travelling in Budapest. She loved to travel, and she was on holidays there with a friend of hers in the Hungarian capital. And she ended up crossing paths with the Irishman, who was a little bit older than her. I think he was either 36 or 37. He's 38 now anyway. And they ended up having a chat, having a few drinks, and going back to his apartment in Budapest. And the end result of what happened is that she ended up dead, very tragically. And he ended up disposing of her body in a suitcase and driving her remains to kind of a secluded area beside a lake and dumping her remains there. And
came back to the flat then?
And came back to his apartment. And then within 2 days, the police in Budapest caught up with him. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they knocked on his door. They tracked him from CCTV from when he'd met Mackenzie, followed their path of they met in one bar, had a few drinks, walked a little bit further, had another few drinks in another bar, and then went back to his apartment. And they tracked him. And when they knocked on his door, there was already a huge search operation searching for the young American nurse. And he seems to have told them she was dead and actually brought them to the spot. Mm-hmm. And the police actually released footage of him in this area beside this lake and kind of wooded area, bringing them to the spot where her body was. And he's been in custody since then. So he's been in custody year and 4 months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where are we at? Yeah.
And he's been charged with murder. Now, he has claimed that in court that she was killed by accident, basically, during sort of
so
BDSM. Is that right? BD?
Yeah, S&M, essentially, sadomasochism. So he has claimed, which is strongly rejected by the prosecution and from her family who I've spoken to, he has claimed that when they were getting intimate in his apartment, that she asked him to get involved in this kind of sexual act, I suppose, where you kind of strangle people, where you get involved in kind of violent sexual behavior. And he claims as a result of all of this that she died accidentally, but he's really tried to do this.
He's saying that it was all on her. She asked for this, that he shouldn't really have got involved in it, but he did because she wanted that. And
definite undertones of victim blaming there. That he has said, I wish, he said in December, I wish that I hadn't done what she asked me to do.
Yeah.
As part of this sex he claims they were having. And that's his story, I suppose. And it's utterly rejected by others. It's utterly rejected. But that's what he is saying happened that night.
Okay. You know? So we can't name him.
No. Not at the moment.
But you can tell us a little bit about, because you obviously travelled over to Budapest. You sat in for this pre-trial hearing. He's looking for bail. He's looking to get out while the court case rumbles on, basically.
Yeah.
And his parents are sort of helping him with that application.
Yeah, so we went over last week and we went to court on Friday, and it was the first time we kind of got to see him. So he kind of comes into court with his like arms and legs shackled, which is very, very different to the Irish way.
Were you allowed to describe him?
Yeah, we are allowed to describe him. We were actually allowed to take photographs of him.
Right.
So we were allowed to bring in with us a photographer who was able to take his picture and was able to take a picture of the judge and was able to take a picture of his legal team. And we were even allowed to take pictures of Mackenzie's family.
On the basis that you block out his face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very trusting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if you didn't, you'd hear all about it, you know? So we obviously wouldn't be interested in taking pictures of the victim's family and using them in court because we wouldn't do that, obviously.
But at some point, this anonymous order might be lifted, or you might be able to. So in Hungary, you have anonymity until you're convicted, perhaps?
That's it, yeah. So we've kind of been back and forth a lot, and we've been trying to figure out the legal system, and it's just so different to our own.
Yeah.
Like, so for example, we'd be allowed to name somebody here who's on trial for murder, but we wouldn't be allowed to take their picture in the courtroom.
No.
Whereas there, we're allowed to take their picture in the courtroom for future use. And we're allowed to take a picture of the judge and picture of everybody who's in the courtroom.
And funny, is the Netherlands similar? Because they always, they just use the first name of the individual. It's quite difficult if you're searching, if you're trying to research something, because you logically put in a name. Yeah. And then you go, oh God, there was no coverage of that court case. But actually, like even with your man, Noafal Fassi, he's described as Noafal F.
Well, that's the thing. There's another thing about initials. So in some of the Hungarian press, they've been using the initials of this Dublin man.
Yeah.
But we were told not to even do that.
Right.
And then it just becomes a call whether or not we do.
Yeah.
But his initials have already been.
You don't want to go into the court in Hungary and to be called out by the judge and to find yourself landed in.
No.
For contempt.
Not really. Because, I mean, we're just trying to find out everything we can about him.
So describe him, and did he make any eye contact with you? Did he recognise that there was Irish media there interested in this story?
So he came in. It was kind of very early. It was around 9 a.m. Mackenzie's family were kind of sitting a few rows back, and obviously they were, obviously their eyes kind of straight away focused on him. He certainly didn't make any eye contact. He appeared very, very nervous. He kind of shuffled. He'd no choice but to shuffle because of the shackles. And then he kind of sat down beside his interpreter, and the judge began to kind of ask him a series of questions, and it was really, really hard to hear him. So I ended up kind of moving where I was sitting and sitting like directly behind him, just so I could hear, because he was speaking in such a low voice. And the judge just asked him, did he permit to being named by the media present? And he said no immediately. Right. That was straight off the bat, which was expected. And then the judge said, look, you're going to be the first witness today. It's going to be followed by medical testimony. Would you prefer to give your own narrative account of what happened on the night you met Mackenzie, or would you prefer a question and answer, via me, essentially, the judge said, and he chose for the question and answer process. So then that kind of began. But yeah, no, in terms of him, like, we do have some details about him, which we can kind of get into. He's from a very kind of affluent area of South Dublin. Very, very well to do. Like, one of the most kind of clipped South Dublin accents I've heard.
Right.
And
you being from
I'm from South Dublin.
Heartland of South Dublin.
And I think you also are from the heartland of South Dublin. So, certainly very, just kind of oozed wealth.
Yeah.
Is how I would describe it. And I mean, I think for other people, like for the Hungarians, they wouldn't recognise. No. Same way as if we go to another country, we don't recognise that.
Exactly.
And I'm sure for Mackenzie's family, they don't recognise that either.
Yeah.
But as the day progressed, that all became more apparent about the wealth.
Okay.
But it was certainly one of the things I noticed first from the way he spoke and the way he carried himself almost.
Right.
So then he proceeded to, so he said he'd do the question and answer process with the judge. So he went up with his interpreter, and then it was just really an account of what had happened, how he met Mackenzie, and how the evening progressed, or the night really progressed with them. So,
and what detail did he give?
Well, So he said they were in a kind of a well-known kind of tourist bar in Budapest, and I think it's called Simple. And he saw her in the pub, and he said she was with another man, so he didn't kind of approach her, but he said she kept making eye contact with him, and he said on the third occasion that she made eye contact with him. This man who he says anyway had been in her company didn't seem to be there anymore, and according to him, she kept looking at him, so he took this as an invitation to approach her. So he went over, and they just started having a chat the way people do in a bar. They were both drinking, I think, half-litre bottles of beer. They had a chat, were getting on well, and then he said they went inside, got another drink, and sat down in a more, as he put it, in a more intimate, secluded area of the bar.
Yeah.
Where I think he said they kissed for a while. So they seemed to be in this bar for, I think, about an hour and a half, he said, anyway. And then she said she wanted to listen to some music, she wanted to dance, so they decided to kind of move on somewhere. And at this point, the judge asked him how much he'd had to drink. And this is what kind of took me aback somewhat. He said he'd had up to 500 millilitres of whiskey, of Jameson.
500 millilitres is like a pint glass.
I think it's something, it's a lot of whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a serious amount of whiskey.
Right.
He said...
It's half a litre.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So he said between 200 and 500. It was a bit unclear.
Right.
But like a lot of whiskey, and he said he had this in the apartment before he went out, on his own.
Right.
Which kind of struck me as a bit odd to be...
Yeah.
Anyway, but look, he said he had that significant amount of whiskey, and then he said he'd up to 10 beers after this, over the course of the rest of the night. Now, that's a lot of alcohol.
Drink, yeah.
That's drink that would put a lot of people in hospital.
Yes. Is it not also backwards drinking? Do you drink whiskey?
To start on the hard stuff. Yeah, I mean...
Anyway, look, let's not get bogged down.
Yeah, it was a lot of drink.
That's what he's claimed anyway.
That's what he has said. And then the judge kind of was asking him if Mackenzie seemed drunk, and he said no, she didn't seem drunk. So it seems like he said a lot of this drinking he was doing was on his own, basically. So I thought it was interesting that he introduced that. Is
this going to be part of his defence?
Yeah, about how much he drank. I mean, that would strike me as a fatal amount of alcohol in your system potentially. So then he said, like, he kind of gave an outline of their conversation. He said she was interested in medieval history. She explained about her job as a neurosurgery nurse, which is a very specialist kind of nurse, you know, halfway between a nurse and a doctor. You know, she was a very accomplished young woman. And so then in the second bar, which was more of a nightclub, they had another, he said she had a shot of blue liquid. He was on the bottles of Heineken at that stage. And then she said that she didn't like the music and let's go somewhere else. And he was like, it was very late at that time. The judge asked him, he said it was kind of between 3 and 5 a.m. So pretty late. And he said he didn't know where else will be open. And did she want to go back to his apartment? And she said yes. And then they kind of walked the short distance back to his apartment. And then there was very brief testimony from him, which basically he said that they were in bed kissing. She asked for rough sex. And then he was beginning to speak about something particularly intimate about his own anatomy. And then the judge stopped it there and said, I'd like the media present and anybody unconnected to this case to please leave the courtroom. Which again would be very different to in Ireland. Yeah. You know, we wouldn't be kicked out of the courtroom. No. We'd be allowed here the testimony of what he says happened next. But that's, you know, we have to obviously abide by what we were told. So then we left the courtroom. And then he proceeded to give testimony, I think for like over 2.5 hours. And we don't know what was said during that time. I mean, I did speak briefly to the family afterwards and they just said it was, you know, it had been really difficult and a really long day. And they traveled all the way to from Florida for a one-day hearing.
So this is the part where he's talking about what actually happened.
What happened.
And then obviously how he disposed of her body.
That's what I am presuming, and unfortunately we can't report on things that we were excluded from attending. So
how annoying.
It was annoying, yeah. But he has given brief accounts before.
Yes.
And the police have given brief accounts before
so
and have said
piece together what
things.
He has said, which is that, he's insisting that it was all on her demands that this
So his version of accounts is that she, asked him to be involved in this kind of S&M activity, and that he wishes he didn't do what she asked him.
Okay.
And it ended up her accidentally being killed. This is his version of accounts, which he has given, and which, the police have
Has he given any explanation in the past as to why, if it was an accident, he then bundled her into a suitcase, drove 140 kilometres and dumped her body in a lake?
Not yet. And also, before he did those things, he left the apartment where her body was, where she unfortunately lay dead, bought the suitcase and rented the car.
Okay.
So he did these things as well in that time period.
Okay.
But no, he hasn't given a public account. I'm sure he has to the police, and the police, it hasn't been said in the indictment, and it hasn't been said openly in court.
So who is this guy, in as much as you can tell us that? What does he work at? And were anyone related to him in the courtroom, or did you hear anything about them?
None of his family were there, which I was surprised by.
Was he there working, or is he living there?
So the judge asked him a series of questions about his own background, and he kind of confirmed his address, he confirmed his name, and he kind of confirmed his educational background. And he said he had studied marketing and law. He had a degree in marketing. He'd also studied law. He confirmed he'd never worked as a solicitor or in any legal.
And did he study here in Ireland?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, that was definitely the insinuation.
Yeah.
And then he said he worked in property development, and that the judge then asked, why were you in Budapest? And he said he was kind of traveling around Eastern Europe looking for a base to set up an internet marketing company. So he'd just been in Prague for some time, and then he had traveled to Budapest, and he said he much preferred Budapest to Prague.
Right.
So just kind of listening to all this, it was kind of like and then the judge asked how much money he had, if he had any children, he said he didn't. If he had any debts, he said he didn't. How much money he had been earning before he was embarking on this kind of internet marketing business that, we don't really know much about. It obviously didn't happen because he was arrested for murder.
And what kind of money was he earning before that?
3,500 a month.
Right.
Which, I mean, is obviously very good money.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it'd be enough money to be kind of
floating
around Eastern Europe in your kind of mid to late 30s.
Wondering where you're going to set up as a base for your new company.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, so he is looking for bail, and I think, did he tell the court that, or was this before that he couldn't
so his lawyer
use the internet or something in prison, and he needed it for his defence case?
So kind of towards the end of so we were eventually allowed back in.
Yeah.
And there were supposed to be medical witnesses. There was supposed to be a forensic psychiatrist who were obviously going to speak about this man's state of mind, I presume, or their evaluation of him after their interviews with him. And then there was supposed to be medical evidence about, in terms of post-mortem evidence, in terms of Mackenzie, in terms of her cause of death and the injuries on her body, and also level of alcohol in her system. And we did hear some evidence that the judge read out, which was that there was no illegal drugs in her system whatsoever. But anyway, some of these medical witnesses failed to show up, basically. So all the medical testimony was postponed. So we only heard from him. And then after the judge went through all of that, and then the judge said there was an application from his lawyer, and his lawyer would be, it was put to me like he is the most high profile, expensive lawyer you can get in Hungary, This guy is very well known. Like he has a Wikipedia page, all of that. He is, if
you're in trouble.
Yeah. If you're in trouble in Hungary and you have the money.
Yeah.
This is the guy you might want to ring. So anyway, he made an application saying my client has been in custody for almost a year and a half. Yeah, wasn't quite, but anyway, and that he needs to get out on bail, to prepare for his trial, and he says he's innocent, and et cetera, et cetera. And then he said that this young man's parents have bought an apartment in Budapest, and he's willing to go on an electronic tag and live in this apartment. And that he's no intention of running. He wants...
They bought this bail apartment, essentially, in the hopes that he gets out.
Yeah.
Well, this is what his lawyer has told the court. There was no sign of his parents there.
No, they weren't there.
Yeah.
No, they definitely weren't there.
Yeah.
But they have the means to have bought him an apartment. And they also have the means to, I think it was just over 52 grand bail. And then for him to live in this apartment with an electronic tag.
Right. Never heard the likes of that before.
No. But I mean, they clearly have means.
Yeah.
And when I said at the beginning that my view of him was that this was a guy
with money, or from background with money.
Yeah.
That sort of confirmed that.
That immediately confirmed that. Because I mean, I don't think there's many people whose parents could suddenly just buy them an apartment in a major European city, at the drop of a hat. And like bought it outright, not mortgage, like as in we bought the apartment.
So was he confident in his demeanour or humble?
No, very confident. Yeah, like I mean, very nervous when he walked in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd say it's awful in a Hungarian prison. I mean, when you see someone in shackles, you immediately think it must be terrible.
Yeah.
But no, confident. Kind of the confidence of someone who's, well educated and moneyed.
Yeah.
I felt.
So what happens next? So the next time round, the next pre-trial hearing, you might get that medical evidence, you might get a cause of death, etc.
Yeah. Well, I think, so the judge said within a week he'll make a decision. So by this Friday on whether or not they're going to let him out into his apartment that his parents have bought.
Right.
And accept the bail. And then after that, I think it's April, for the next one-day hearing, which will be a lot of medical evidence. And the judge actually indicated that a lot of that the media won't be permitted into either. So,
and is that because that are they arguing what can get in and out and not in a trial? Is this like sort of in camera nearly because they don't want certain amounts of evidence going before the jury when the jury are brought into the case?
Like it's actually really difficult to get answers to loads of these kind of questions that I've been trying to get answers to about why.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the judge, I think, because we just had a translator in court, they said it was on moral grounds that we had to be excluded from the hearing in order to hear what had happened, what he said had happened that led to Mackenzie's death. I find that baffling.
And you don't know, of course, because you're working in a different territory, whether or not you could have challenged that decision. Here sometimes the media can challenge a decision.
Yeah, no, I don't think that would work over there. I think it would just be like, no, this is our domain.
Yes.
Well,
it's a fascinating story and continues to be.
The family were there, Mackenzie's family were there, and I spoke briefly to the brother.
Yeah.
Her younger brother, and he was, just a lovely young man, just devastated, and they were just exhausted, and I didn't want to obviously,
harangue them.
No, and like what they had heard, we couldn't report on. You wouldn't be hassling people after that. But the brother did want to speak, and he just kind of wanted to briefly say, that they just want the truth, that his sister is someone he looked up to, was his protector. She was older than him, his protector since he was a child, and that they just have to be there to listen to all of this. But they're they've made it clear that they're offended is the wrong word. They're just disgusted by what's being said about.
Yes, so they feel that her name is she's dead and not here to defend herself, and that her name is being smeared by his allegations and what he's claiming happened.
Yeah.
Well, look, we'll come back to it when you're back. Did you enjoy Budapest?
It was so brief.
Yeah,
it was so brief, and it was so. What I was there for was so sad.
Yeah.
It was almost kind of hard to enjoy it, but...
beautiful city.
Yeah.
And a terrible tragedy. Okay, well, we'll come back to it when you have further information. Thanks a million, Ali.
Thanks.
If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there. But the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on. He wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens. Divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after. There's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired, and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, it is. There was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, people what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed? Because of that, they had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from The Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.